You might have heard John chapter 6 before. You might have heard at the Mass that this is truly Jesus present, body, blood, soul, divinity, every single time we go to Mass, in every tabernacle, in every Catholic church throughout the world. But the Eucharist is what Jesus says the Eucharist is.
John 6 does not prove the Eucharist as Catholics teach it today. Chapter 6 happens after Matthew 12 and 13, where we see the national rejection of Jesus as the Messiah by the nation of Israel, committing the unpardonable sin. And then in Matthew 13, we see Jesus begin to change his policy of teaching publicly and using parables. You can see this clearly in Matthew 13, verse 3 and verse 10. Jesus tells the Jews in verse 27 to not work for food that perishes, but work for food that leads to eternal life. Then the Jews ask, well, what is this work of God that we must do? And Jesus tells them the work of God is that you believe in him who he sent. Jesus then references back to Exodus 16 in relation to the manna that fell in the wilderness. It was given as a test for the Jews to see if they would walk in God's law. The manna was a supernatural gift from God that they ate for 40 years. Moses will summarize this in Deuteronomy 8. Verse 33, we find out that the bread of God is a he because it's Jesus. Jesus is now the manna offered by the Father. Verse 34, we see that the Jews are still thinking naturally. They want this bread. In verse 35, Jesus doubles down again and says, I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will not thirst. So obviously he's speaking spiritually because believing in Jesus doesn't quench our thirst. Notice the emphasis is on belief. In verse 40, we see that believe on him may have everlasting life. We see it again in verse 47, that he that believeth me will have everlasting life. He then goes on in verses 47 through 51 and explains how the bread that the fathers ate in the wilderness, they still died because they were eating physical, material, natural bread, and that still led to them having a physical death. The bread that Jesus offers us, if we eat it, we don't die. It's bread from heaven. When we eat it, it leads to eternal life. Notice in verse 51 that eating this bread leads to eternal life, just as we see that believing in verse 47 leads to everlasting life, and believing in verse 40 leads to everlasting life. They are used parallel, synonymously, one with another, because Jesus is speaking spiritually that by eating or believing will lead you into eternal life. Acts 15 and the Mosaic Law forbids eating blood. So Jesus is using eating synonymously with believing. Hey, come along with me in a book-by-book summary through the entire Bible in chronological order, with extra historical backgrounds and insights from a Jewish perspective. Comment summary below and I'll send you the details.